Before we start, let's just posture ourselves in prayer. Father, as we dive into the Bible today, we're thankful for your word. And as we work through Exodus, we just want to better understand not only the historical context, but we want to just know how to be able to apply it in our current day lives. Help us to see the entirety of this passage, not just as a bunch of different events and different circumstances that happen to the Israelite people, but help us to just be able to hear the compassion and care that you have for us, for all people, your desire to have just a direct relationship with us. So we open our hearts to you, we open our minds, and we just want the leading of your Spirit to take place here with us today. Thank you for this time, and we just ask that you be present. In Jesus' name, amen. So I'm not sure about you, but as I've read through Exodus to this point, I've been thinking about all the memorable stories that come out of Exodus and that have been taught in the church, that have been taught to me personally, but I also think about how I've taught them to my kids growing up in the church. And I specifically, as I started into these couple of chapters, I was thinking of the Veggie Tales, right? The Veggie Tales stories that were all like, they're so ingrained in our heads. As I started to watch them, I got off track. I had to get back, focus, Rob, on this, but they were so fun to watch. And I remembered how that so many of the stories of Exodus show up in that. And then I think of I think of all of the picture books, like when we read to our kids at night. So many great stories showed up in Exodus, and the pictures just came alive in Exodus, right? Some of the other pictures, not so much, but Exodus, those pictures just kind of came alive. I was thinking about, some of the catchy songs like, maybe Lise, you could sing this for us. Do you remember that, like the Pharaoh, oh, let my people go, that little song that we would always sing, right? I'm not sure which way that all goes, but these are all the pieces that come out of Exodus that we've been training ourselves and training our kids in. But then I actually started to think back to how many incredible artists have graced us, like with memorable and important sculptures and paintings that remind us of Moses's life, the 10 plagues of Egypt, the Passover, the parting of the Red Sea, the giving of the 10 commandments and the Ark of the Covenant. If you start to think about all of these various things, you recognize the importance of Exodus. These events that we're studying are foundational to our faith, foundational to our Christian faith. And while they're like monumental stories in and of themselves, the beautiful thing is, and we've talked a little bit about this over the last couple of weeks, is that it's really a beautiful foreshadowing of what's to come. And so I love the fact that we're taking a solid amount of time in here just to kind of unpack these stories. And specifically today, we're going to unpack other parts of the law. So today we're going to dive into chapters 23 and 24 of Exodus. But before we do so, I just want to remind us about where we are in the book. It's a long book. So chapter 19, Daryl started at the beginning of this week, is the second half of Exodus. And it's broken up into two different parts, right? The first half, the people are being freed. The second half is like the Lord is setting up his nation. So we're starting in chapter 19. That's where it happens. We're in 23 and 24 today. And basically, from here forward to the end of Exodus, it's going to be God outlining instructions intended to help the Israelites establish a new covenantal relationship with God after being in exile. So this particular area that we're working in right now is the area called the Mosaic Covenant, and it's unveiled initially through the 10 Commandments, but then it's expanded on throughout the balance of Exodus, and it provides the foundation of both beliefs and practices, and everything from common eating practice to complex worship regulations. So it's generally consists, the laws that we're working through right now, I think Dele covered this off a little bit yesterday, but it consists of three types of laws: the moral law, the ceremonial and religious laws, and the civic law. And the moral law, just, what is right and just in God's eyes. And the second would be the ceremonial or the religious laws, which is like they govern how God is to be approached and worshiped in the Old Testament. And then the civil law, which contains both like civil and criminal laws of the Old Testament nation of Israel. But part of this, and I think this is really important to remember, is that this is a people that have come out of exile, that have had no structure themselves to lead. They have been led over for the last number of years, and they actually have not been in a position of leadership. And so these laws are there to help them build like a certain unity and a certain systems and structures that they know how to function together as a community. But unity is really important, because we all know that when we come together as a divided people, there needs to be some unifying forces. And the laws that we're talking about now help bring together kind of a unifying picture of how this nation is going to operate. So Dele, yesterday, he convicted me when we were talking about kind of the lack of following the law and what happens. He was talking a little bit about the anarchy that you can start to see in nations where they stop to follow the law. And there was this personal conviction that you gave me. So this last weekend, I was in the United States with taking care of Lois's mom and her brother. And I don't know, for those of you who I know a little bit about the United States, it was Memorial Day down there, and which in small town America is filled with like community dinners, parades, and barbecues. It's like an amazing, amazing time. Well, with parades, what comes with parades is candy, right? And I was reminded of my fleshly desires when I got back into the truck after the parade and I saw my cup holders full of candy. It was terrible news. I very, very quickly moved to like my fleshly desires, and Lois wasn't in the truck, so I immediately searched for my favorite candy and I hoarded it and I started to eat it. And I think that this is our tendency when we don't take laws, or in this case, like healthy habits, seriously. We just slip into our own foolish ways. And we'll touch back on this again at the end. But as we read through this next set of laws, remember the heart behind the law is to guide the Israelites into holy living. It isn't to kind of put them in a box, but it's a guide to help them understand what it means to live in right relationship with each other and with God. All right, so let's go. We're going to start into chapter 23. And this little section here is called Laws of Justice and Mercy. Do not spread false reports. Do not help a guilty person by being a malicious witness. Do not follow the crowd in doing wrong when you give testimony in a lawsuit. Do not pervert justice by siding with the crowd, and do not show favoritism to a poor person in a lawsuit. If you come across your enemy's ox or donkey wandering off, be sure to return it. If you see the donkey or someone who hates you fallen down under its load, do not leave it there. Be sure to help them with it. Do not deny justice to poor people in their lawsuits. Have nothing to do with false charge, and do not put an innocent or honest person to death, for I will not acquit the guilty. Do not accept a bribe, for bribes blind those who see and twist the words of the innocent. Do not oppress a foreigner. You yourselves know what it feels to be foreigners, because you were foreigners in Egypt. And then we move into the Sabbath laws. So those laws, we're talking about what's it like to have justice and mercy in our communities. As we build unity in this new community, what is it like to have justice and mercy towards each other? And then next, we move into the Sabbath laws. For 6 years, you're to sow your fields and harvest the crops, but during the 7th year, let the land lie unplowed and unused. Then the poor among your people may get food from it, and the wild animals may eat what's left. Do the same with your vineyard and your olive grove. 6 days do your work, but on the 7th do not work, so that your ox and your donkey may rest, and so that the slave born into your household and the foreigner living among you may be refreshed. Be careful to do everything I have said to you. Do not invoke the names of other gods. Do not let them be heard on your lips. So this idea of taking some time away, not only to refresh yourself, but to refresh the land and to give space to those that are maybe under your employment. And then we talk about the 3 annual festivals. 3 times a year, you are to celebrate a festival with me. Celebrate a festival to me, sorry. Celebrate the festival and unleavened bread. For 7 days, eat bread made without yeast, as I commanded you. Do this at the appointed time in the month of Aviv. For this month you came out of Egypt. No one is to appear to me empty-handed. Celebrate the festival of harvest with first fruits of the crops you sow in your field. Celebrate the festival of ingatherings at the end of the year, when you gather crops from the field. 3 times a year, all manner to appear before the sovereign Lord. Do not offer the blood of a sacrifice to me, along with anything containing yeast. The fat of my festival offerings must not be kept until morning. Bring the best of your first fruits of your soil to your house, to the house of the Lord your God. Do not cook a young goat in its mother's milk. So the point of these festivals would be in remembrance. Remember where you've come from, and remember what I've freed you from. Remember what I've offered you when you're celebrating the harvest. And bring those sacrifices to me in a certain way. So Moses shares these commandments with the people, and he shares what God desires this relationship to look like. This is the end of those very specific commandments that he's given right after the Old Testament. He's a present God, he's an involved God, and he's a protector God. He just wants to be involved in their lives. And then Moses shares this. And this is where he talks about God's angel preparing a way. See, I'm sending an angel ahead of you to guard you along the way and to bring you to the place that I prepared. Pay attention to him and listen to what he says. Do not rebel against him, for he will not forgive your rebellion, since my name is in him. If you listen carefully to what he says and do all that I say, I will be an enemy to your enemies and will oppose those who oppose you. My angel will go ahead of you and bring you into the land of the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Canaanites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, and I will wipe them out. Do not bow down before their gods or worship them or follow their practices. You must demolish them and break their sacred stones to pieces. Worship the Lord your God, and his blessing will be on your water and on your food. It will take away sickness from among you, and none will miscarry or be barren in your land. I will give you a full lifespan. I will send terror ahead of you and throw into confusion every nation you encounter. I will make all of your enemies turn their backs and run. I will send the hornet ahead to drive the Hivites, the Canaanites, and the Hittites out of your way. But I will not drive them out in a single year, because the land would become desolate and the wild animals too numerous for you. Little by little, I will drive them out before you until you have increased enough to take possession of the land. I will establish your borders from the Red Sea to the Mediterranean Sea and from the desert to the Euphrates River. I will give you into your hands the people who live in the land, and you will drive them out before you. Do not make a covenant with them or their gods. Do not let them live in your land, because they will cause you to sin against me, because the worship of their gods will certainly be a snare to you. So picture this. The people have just moved out of captivity and slavery, and you've just heard through Moses, who has spoken to God firsthand, that he is for you, and that because of that, no one can be against you. He just asks, follow my ways through this covenant, follow my commands, and you will be a great nation. And so this next chapter, this is Israel's response. Then the Lord said to Moses, come up to the Lord, and you, Aaron, Nadab, Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel. You are to worship at a distance, but Moses alone is to approach the Lord. The others must not come near to him, and the people may not come up with him. When Moses went and told the people all of the Lord's words and laws, they responded with one voice, everything the Lord has said, we will do. So Moses wrote down everything that the Lord had said. And then he got up in the next morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain and set up 12 stone pillars representing the 12 tribes of Israel. Then he sent young Israelite men, and they offered burnt offerings and sacrificed young bulls as fellowship offerings to the Lord. Moses took half of the blood and put it in bowls, and the other half he splashed against the altar. Then he took the book of the covenant and read it to the people, and they responded, "We will do everything the Lord has said. We will obey." Moses then took the blood, sprinkled it on the people. "This is the blood of the covenant that the Lord has made with you in accordance with these words." And at this point, the Mosaic covenant has been ratified. It's sealed. And that's how they did it, with blood. They sealed this with blood between the people and with God. And then Moses, Aaron, Nadab, Abihu, and 70 elders of Israel went up and saw the God of Israel. And under his feet was something like pavement made of lapis lazuli and as bright blue as the sky. But God did not raise his hand against these leaders of the Israelites. They saw God, they ate, and they drank. The Lord said to Moses, "Come with me to the mountain and stay here. I will give you the tablets of stone with the law and the commandments I've written for their instruction." Then Moses set out with Joshua his aide, and Moses went up to the mountain. He said to the elders, "Wait here for us until someone comes back to you. Aaron and Hur are with you, and anyone involved in the dispute can go to them." When Moses went up to the mountain, the cloud covered it. The glory of the Lord settled on Mount Sinai. For 6 days, the cloud covered the mountain, and on the seventh day, the Lord called Moses from within the cloud. To the Israelites, the glory of the Lord looked like a consuming fire on top of the mountain, and Moses entered the cloud as he went on up the mountain, and he stayed on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. So there's some big highlights in this last passage. And let's kind of work through those together. The covenant is confirmed. So God now has direct relationship with his people. They're set apart, and he wants to dwell with them. He wants to go with them as they follow his ways. The second piece that I thought was interesting is that Moses, Aaron, Nadab, Abihu, and the 70 elders ascend to the mountain and see the manifestation of God. So this would be the first time that there has been more interaction with God than just Moses. And they eat and they drink in his presence. And this signifies it's like this beautiful peace and fellowship with God. The leadership of this nation and God are spending this time together in fellowship. And then the glory of the Lord settled on Mount Sinai. And covered by a cloud for 6 days, on the seventh day, God calls Moses from within the cloud. And the appearance of the glory of God is described as a consuming fire on top of the mountain. And it's visible to the Israelites below. I was thinking about this, and I've pictured some of the more beautiful mountains that I've seen. And then Mount Sinai isn't one of those most beautiful mountains. It's quite a rocky crag. But then I think about, a cloud settling in and then this fire coming on it. And, we think of sunsets. So I was recently in Calgary and I watched a sunset as it was going over the Rocky Mountains as I was in Calgary, and the brilliance, the way it just like set on fire, and you're just like, God, you are so big and you are so powerful. You are so beautiful. Just picture this, but with fire. And I was just immediately, if I was one of those people that was taking it in, I would immediately sense God's presence. I think about this. God invites us to be in his presence. He invited his people in Exodus to be in his presence. But it all started with a covenant. I think for most of us, we've made a covenant. We've made a commitment to God to follow the ways of Jesus. His power and his presence has been evident in our lives. But like the Israelites, if we don't understand the weakness of our flesh, we quickly make promises to the covenants and to people or to God, and we don't keep them very well. Upon hearing the terms of the covenant, like the laws as they were read out to them, like the Israelites immediately wanted in. They wanted the benefits of God's presence. But as some scholars have said, they likely were overconfident, and they were likely blind to their weakness. And because of that, they didn't actually have the discipline to hold up their end of the covenant by following the laws. Jesus reminds us this in Matthew 26, and that this is a problem with humanity. When he was at one of his deepest hours in the garden, he finds those who have made a discipleship covenant with him sleeping. So these are his disciples. These are the ones who said, hey, count me in. I want to be following you. I want to follow you. And this is what it says. And he came to the disciples and found them sleeping. And he said to Peter, so could you not watch with me for just 1 hour? Pray and watch that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit is indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. Again, for the second time, he went away and prayed, my Father, if this cannot pass unless I drink it, your will be done. And again, he came back and he found them sleeping and their eyes were heavy. I think a little bit about me in the truck with this pile of candy in front of me. I walked into it and, my spirit is indeed willing to not touch that stuff. But my flesh is kind of weak, and it will only be a few pieces of candy. And in fact, I'm going to eat the ones that Lois doesn't even like, so she won't even notice that I've stolen her candy, right? Like it's so easy for us to kind of step into that place in our lives. And whether it's that or whether it's faith issues, those are the types of things that we struggle with. So as I think about this as it applies to us today, like we don't have hundreds of specific Mosaic laws to live up to on our end of the covenant, but we do have God's heart behind these laws. And we know that Jesus calls us to a higher standard of holy living. We also aren't wandering in the desert trying to establish like a nationhood, but instead we are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that we may declare the praises of him who calls out of darkness into his wonderful light. Just think about that. We're not wandering, but we're actually already called out. We are the royal priesthood. We're the chosen people. We are the holy nation. So as we step into this and apply this into our lives today, I think that there's a couple of things for us to think on. And so I'll throw out a couple of discussion questions that we can have, and then I'll follow up with just a quick reflection on those discussion questions on my part. So the first one is, like the Israelites, we desire to have the power and presence of God in our lives. We do desire that. We don't want to be wandering. I'm just wondering if we'd be willing to share how obedience to God's way has given you a testimony of his power and presence. Because his testimony of his power and his presence gives us all courage. And I love this, that this is one of the beautiful parts of the body of Christ, is when we get together, we actually get to spend time with each other to hear the things that God is doing in our lives. And it actually gives us courage. We were just talking about this. It gives us courage to step out and to take first steps of our own. So I'm wondering if today, part of what we could do together is, as we reflect on this passage, reflect on places where we've seen God's power and his presence in our lives because we've taken obedient steps to follow him. And then the second one is, in your relationship with God and others, where is your spirit willing but your flesh weak? And then I think the bigger question is, like, what do you do with that? Right? It's one thing to recognize it, but the second thing is, like, what do we do with that? So while we're thinking about these things and just making some notes to share when we break out here, I'll just share something that I thought about. It came to my memory as I was working on these chapters this week. And maybe it'll be an encouragement to some of you who have kids in your house, or maybe if you're grandparents and you're thinking about your grandkids. But one of the places that of God's presence that Lois and I desired in our family was for our kids to love Jesus with all of their hearts. That was a place where we just said, God, we want your presence in our home, in our kids, and we want them to follow you with all of their hearts, and that their faith would actually inform their life decisions, that they wouldn't be separate, that their life decisions would be informed by their faith. And so one of the things that we did in our family is we had a little bedtime routine that happened every night that involved our kids. It involved these three things. It involved talking about the day. So we'd lie down in bed with them, we just talk about the day. And I tend to be in our family the one who would be, hey, it's bedtime, guys, we need to get going. Lois had a little bit more flexibility with that. So our bedtimes tended to get a little bit more extended. But I actually learned that that was one of the most powerful conversation places in our family, is lying down at the end of the night, just talking about our day with our kids. And one at a time, we would do it one at a time. We would always spend some time reading the Bible, and we would always spend time praying together. And they would pray, and we would actually talk about the passages in how they applied in our lives. And then before Lois and I went to bed, we would go back into their rooms and we would pray over them as they slept. We prayed for their future spouses. We prayed for the strengthening of their faith walk, the challenges that they might have had during that day, and the power to overcome the fears they faced. And you know, when the flesh was weak, it was like at midnight when we were both tired and we're tucked in bed, and we looked at each other and we said, hey, did you pray over the kids? And neither one of us had done it. One of us always got up. So, you know, I might not have done great with the candy, but with Lois and I together, we made sure that our nighttime prayer over our kids took place. And we give God the glory because he was faithful. He's been faithful to our girls. We didn't fight that battle alone. We had him, we had his presence. Just as he was like, even as he shared in this covenant, what he is for us, how he is for us, we felt that as we were raising our kids. Our God is present and he's powerful, and he leads our kids today, and he guides them even to this day. So I think it's a great encouragement for us to kind of look back and see where God has been faithful, and see where God has shown his presence and his power, because we were willing to take little steps of obedience and follow him.